So you,
Yeah, I know.
yeah, small world. Jim Carpenter. Me too.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Sure.
We're getting ready to get started. Okay, so story time again. I like stories. Last year, Copilot got enabled for wider distribution, I guess, to our clients. And Kyle, technology, ooh, the shiny new object with all of our clients are like, oh, ChatGPT, oh, Copilot, oh, AI, let's roll
Really
it out.
excited.
Yeah, he was really excited. And I find out, Kyle's like, oh, we're going to turn this on. And I'm like, what do you mean we're going to turn it on? What? And I'm over here Googling because, and dusting and bingling. Sorry. I'm sorry. I actually dusted off my encyclopedias for this. But, in all seriousness, I was very worried about it because just our own experiences over time of managing the data, the sheer data, the documentation, the files, the accesses of all of those files, who had access to what. We really, at a granular level, are sharing. We're a closely integrated team and we're always working together, we're always sharing information and data. But realizing that if we had issues like that our clients probably had even bigger issues, since we were already implementing standardization and compliance frameworks and being due diligent about that sort of thing internally. It was scary to me that perhaps salary data could be shared inadvertently if using Copilot because somebody else had put it in the wrong place or had the right access control permissions. So I go to Kyle and Kyle, I don't know if we should do this. I'm scared. And he's like, no, we need to do it. And I'm like, compliance, policy, process. And eventually we worked it out and worked together and realized that many other MSPs and MSSPs out there were probably going to, oh, $20 a user. Let's just turn that on, get that money. Sure. But we wanted to be more responsible about that. And so Kyle has done a tremendous job of working to put an actual data governance program in place. And we have pushed back to clients and we have encouraged them to also do the same things that we had learned through our lessons learned from a data governance perspective and still working on. So, as part of our holistic solution, it's not just the technology that we roll out, it is the process, the policy, the standardization, the access controls, and leveraging those things to be responsible or as responsible as we can be to roll these types of things out. And, cybersecurity is all about the risk and what can you do to mitigate the risk as best as possible. Will it protect everything? No, there's still users that are going to input information and data and stuff that they shouldn't, Sean, right? And that's scary. But so we use those lessons. We took those to heart and we use those, and that kind of kicks us off for questions here for the panel. Thank you.
Yeah, so we got a panel kind of set up here, kind of like a fireside chat kind of deal where we've got a bunch of questions. We're going to ask these very smart people about Copilot, AI, how to use it responsibly, best practices, all that kind of stuff. So to kick things off, just from a best practices standpoint, what are some recommendations, things you want to be mindful of when rolling out Copilot? And I'm especially curious about access control, data governance, and training.
I could take that one. So, first and foremost, it's very easy for organizations to allow their users to just create data, create their own SharePoint sites, create their own team sites, put data wherever they want, and not really put any controls behind it. And so, what happens when it's a free for all like that? The the platform of Copilot allows you to ask it something, as Beth is alluding to. Let me see the salary information for Sarah Kim. And if you accidentally have been shared a file in the past, or maybe somebody created a SharePoint site and dropped something in there and said, everybody can access this, and you didn't know that, now you can see that data. Now you can see Sarah's information. You can see other people's information. So um, really what we do as part of our data governance program, what we've been doing, what we do for R3, what we do for our customers is we take a look at permission structures across the organization inside of those SharePoint sites, inside of those team sites. We work with the department leaders that know where their data is at and that are responsible for that data. And we really make them aware of what those permissions are set and make sure that that's in alignment with what they are expecting it to be. And if not, we make those changes. We are moving that around. We're getting rid of, excess waste and data and things like that. And that paves the way for, really getting the most out of Copilot. Not only are we protecting the data from, insider threats, but we are also making it easier to use the platform. So when you're asking it those questions, when you're prompting it for information, you're not getting those hallucinations as what Carly alluded to, because that data governance program is now in play and the data is accurate and up to date.
And I wanted to piggyback off of a couple of things that you said. So like one thing, it's called Copilot, not Autopilot. Although we have Autopilot for onboarding devices, but Copilot is there to help you. So it's not going to take over. It is there to make it more efficient. And this AI is just making the data governance, data security story finally top of mind. We've as technology has evolved, which if you think about it, technology, cybersecurity is very new in the grand scheme of the history of the world. And so it's been wild, wild west as we've advanced, just add more, add more. And now finally, security is at the forefront of as people are modernizing, which security was an afterthought previously. And so now, like one thing I say, and I did data security before all security, because it's a big culture change. Adopting AI, allowing these co-pilots to be used by your users is going to be a big culture change because it's changing how we just kind of operate daily. And change is hard, but the one thing that's constant is change. And so we have to just kind of suck it up. We have those stakeholders that are going to grumble. They like to do it their way or the status quo way. But if you do the status quo, you're going to be behind. And if you keep putting security as a back burner, like I've worked with a company who compliance and security is not what they like. They don't care as much. I'm like, cool, you're not going to get contracts with the government if you don't take this seriously. If you don't put the effort into it, it's just flat as day. If you don't get your CMMC level 2 cert, forget it. You're not getting the contract for that project. So do you want to make money? You got to spend money to make money. And with AI, we've had, when it came to like data security, there was no budget, but now the end users, the business side now wants this. So they're like, here, IT, take my money. But now they have to figure out a safe way. And so from like that data governance perspective, that fear of seeing what is out there or inadvertent spillage, it's going back and looking at those access controls. Kind of like when people are migrating to the cloud, they've got to rethink how they were operating, how they are using SharePoint, where they're keeping files. And even like at Microsoft, there's been like some changes in, especially with Copilot, like when you share a link where I can share my OneDrive link, I don't want to just share it with all Microsoft FTEs because now everybody can probably see it, which it doesn't, for the most part, that doesn't matter. But if I share only these people, so it's taking that extra step in my head to then secure kind of the access to that document and what Copilot sees for that document. So, and that goes across all of the Copilots because again, it's all about where can it reach and what can it reason over.
Awesome. I have a follow-up question I just thought of. Does Copilot for security, any of them, is there any monitoring or alerting that you can configure? So let's say the intern runs a query, hey, what's the salary information of the company? Like, do any alarms go off?
So for something like that, if that data is not tagged, like that salary information, and like It's when it's not tagged and there's no access controls that you're not, if you don't have alerts created for that, like CUI, that's, if we're all here wanting to touch federal government information, CUI. So if you have somebody who, if your network is, it's like a GCC high network so that you can host CUI on it, but you have people who are not working on that contract who are there. If they are not separated and that information is not tagged as CUI, they could see it. You're not going to get an alert because the system doesn't know that that's CUI and the system doesn't know that that person isn't allowed to see it. So it's all about how you set up your policies. And so there is, while co-pilots are not available, most of them are not available in GCC High, there's this work that can be done in preparation so that when it is there, you are confident in the security of your system for implementing it. Because no, you're not going to get alert. Now, you can create monitoring alerts in Copilot. You can restrict Copilot from certain tagged information. You can have alerts for if somebody tries to put a harassing prompt, and like Copilot's not going to allow me to say like, oh, hey, create like a fun ditty about Beth and how she looks like blah, blah, blah. It's not going to do that. It will hallucinate and it will give you something wrong, or it won't give you something along the lines of what you're asking. Because again, that responsible, like ethical AI, believe me, we tried it. That's the fun thing about getting to test some of these products is you get to do the things that you're not supposed to do in order to trigger alerts or trigger hallucinations. And so you can have within Copilots itself, you create policies and alerts for monitoring Copilot usage, as well as Microsoft Purview has the AI Hub, which is monitoring how your users are interacting with different AIs. If you allow, like obviously in the federal, you can't use like free chat GPT out in the wild, but it will also tell you if and you can block sensitive information being put into some of these third-party AIs. And so it's monitoring that so you can then create data loss prevention policies. You can fine tune your access control policies. And it's also monitoring how your policies are being alerted. Like, hey, your conditional access policy, this is triggered a lot. Maybe you want to fine tune it. So it's watching that kind of security creep, security drift, allowing you to then become more compliant, more secure when you're doing the prompting.
And I want to add too that, the business side of it has to be involved in this step. They're the ones that own the data, the different groups, like in SharePoint, the files, whether it be finance and accounting, HR, the operations delivery teams. And so when you are going through that process, you probably have a lot of data that you have to go through, and it's going to take time. You have to really think about, what your structure needs to look like now, but also in the future, and how that aligns with your business, your growth. You also need to be thinking about changing roles. So people in the company are in this department and then move to another department, making sure to turn off those accesses and then, getting them enabled in somewhere else. So the business has to be a partner with the, provider, your IT services, to be successful going forward as well.
So once we get that data governance, those access controls are in place, how can I use Copilot for security to aid in data governance and regulatory challenges?
So I think there's a lot of ways you can use this. I'll kind of focus on two examples. So as we mentioned earlier, we've gone through our SOC 2, Type 2, we've gone through ISO, we're going through CMMI, and during those, during those audits, we're providing a lot of evidence to the auditors on incidents that may have come up in the organization, for example. So Copilot for security, what we can do with that is after an incident has happened, we can ask it to provide a summary of that incident. So I think it's similar to what Carly was showing a little earlier on the screen. You can ask it to provide a summary of that incident. You can produce that documentation to the auditors, you keep it in your evidence library. And that takes the amount of time a SOC analyst would have to do to write that summary. It cuts that down into just minutes, whereas before, sometimes you may have a group of people jumping on a meeting, providing a lot of intel into what happened, what we had to do. Someone's sitting there scribing all of that information, and that could take a couple hours. And you can reduce this down to a few minutes. Now, it's certainly not a replacement for those group discussions. We have to be careful of that because it's very tempting, especially as technical professionals, to get really excited about that and just say, "Hey, I've done this. I've checked the box," and Beth will come after me for that for sure. Um, but it really can augment that time that your team is spending to go through that. Another example of this, just kind of a real world, something that takes us a lot of time in the past, is producing information during so the audit's coming up, let's say in December. We're getting ready for, we want to make sure our evidence is there. We can use this to produce information about our devices. So one of the things that we do to make sure our devices are compliant within Intune is, are they patched? Do they have the latest security updates on them? That sort of thing. And so devices not meeting those requirements are going to fail the compliance check within the platform. And it's something that we're monitoring, and we're doing as part of this compliance program to make sure everything's safe and secure. And so we can ask Copilot, why is Jones's device not compliant? What is the reason it's not? And it will tell us without us having to sit there and look at error code 725, blah, 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 Googling that. Sorry, binging that. I'm sorry. It's a bad habit. And putting that information into the prompt, and it spits it out right there because it's pulling from Microsoft's Learn articles and that sort of thing, to give you a reason, and then you can go resolve that with the recommendations it gives.
I'd like to piggyback on something as well. Question real quick though.
Yeah, so being that Microsoft went to this decision not to tell the user, hey, your password is up, or you need to change your password. They just stopped that kind of like a year or so ago. Will Copilot go against, or anything in Copilot go against these policy and strategy that Microsoft has said? Meaning, if I want to set up alerts for Copilot to tell employees, hey, it's 120 days or 90 days, change your password. Will it go against that, or will it not?
So I think those alerts that you would set up would be outside of the Copilot platform, and they would be something that's more custom. Copilot for Security will tell you if a user's password was recently reset, if you're going through that process, or if you're going through that prompt. I don't know if it would necessarily go against it. It would just more of, it's your own custom configuration outside of Copilot, be something in Entra ID, for example, that you configure, like a logic app to send out that password reset notification email.
Yeah, all the Copilots honor what your security policies are. So now, if it is like, if your policy is not like the best practice, or like if it falls out of compliance, like with a certain regulation, like password length or whatever, it's gonna, Copilot will say, hey, this doesn't fit with, regulation, blah, blah, blah. You might want to rethink that, how you write that policy. Similar to how Defender for Cloud will tell you if you're out of compliance, or if any of your devices are out of compliance. So kind of exactly what Kyle was saying. Copilot for Security is not monitoring your compliance. It is your other tools. But when you are investigating an incident, or you want to look into the compliance of something, Copilot can then pull that information in and digest it and give you that summary of what happened.
But it's pulling it from Sentinel.
But it's pulling it from either Sentinel, or it's pulling it from Defender for Cloud or Entra. It depends on what you have connected to Copilot for Security is where and how you're going to get your information. So if you only have Sentinel connected, then you're only going to get responses based upon the information from Sentinel, which is not giving you that robust picture, which is what the beauty of Copilot for Security will do, is that it takes all of the information related and it can pull information from your Tanium, from Darktrace, from Entra or Okta, whatever you have, and it's using what you have in your system. Like a lot of people start from ServiceNow. ServiceNow is a plugin that we have, so it'll take that information and then you can then take what the summary is and then add it into your what you're tracking in ServiceNow. And I'm sorry, Jones, you were going to say something too.
Oh, absolutely, that's great. So the thing I wanted to add is we're at this tipping point, and Microsoft has provided a number of tools that are really fundamentally changing the way we do compliance. So the way I imagine most of us in the room do it today is a week prior to your assessment, there's a mad dash. Everybody finds, there's a 700 meg Excel file somewhere that's being shared, and there's 52 versions of it, and it's a total pain, right? So one of the things that Copilot has brought to the table, along with a lot of the other Microsoft technologies, is the ability to not have to wait for the next week before an audit to know where you stand with everything. So Azure Policy, Intune, Defender, all of these things can now monitor your compliance against various things. You can now ask Copilot midway through your assessment cycle, hey, is there any drift from where we were last time? What is our overall compliance with X? Where are we in this area? And you can get an answer back, because if you're using these tools, if you have them set up and configured, it is now no longer a completely manual process to go screen cap all of these things. And that is one of the beauties of Copilot, the way it's actually taking us to a continuous monitoring capacity, and the ability to go ask a question through the Copilot interface, as long as you have it connected to Entra, to Azure Policy, to Defender, to all these other things, to pull back this answer for you without having to, do it the hard or the manual way. And I think that's really one of the big benefits of all of these tools being connected.
There's a drift between different tools, right? The information you get from one tool different in another tool. So I guess what I'm trying to figure out, if Copilot is getting this information, which one am I supposed to trust in those tools? The Entra, the Intune, something has to be my record, my permanent record that upkeeps all the information across my environment. But there's a drift. So what is Microsoft doing to kind of eliminate that?
So I would ask one clarifying question maybe, and Carly, if you want to jump on that one,
Sure.
can you give an example?
Sure.
A specific example.
I have a computer in Colorado. I have another computer endpoint in Houston, one in Dubai, one in Brazil. The information may not be the same, meaning that about check-in, hasn't checked in. That person's been using that machine forever, but the check-in information, which means that there's going to be a drift. The data is not going to be consistent. And, we run into that all the time at APIs. When we're trying to find endpoints, we know the person's using it, but it's not always updating in Azure, right? So there's a drift. The information's inconsistent, which means we're out of compliance. It's telling me that the machines are out of compliance, but they may have been getting updates. So I'm trying to figure out, is there something Microsoft is doing to help to eliminate that drift between your different record areas?
I do want to add in here, and this kind of touches upon the compliance component. There's the technology aspect of it, but there's still the human and the process aspect of it too. Doing the analysis, going and doing an access audit, or doing a, evaluation, speaking to the people. What is their connectivity? And we can have those tools and technologies, but you still need your independent compliance program and group to be spearheading and doing audits and internal audits on a regular, frequent basis.
Yeah, absolutely. I could agree with that.
And so as far as is Microsoft doing something to kind of make that check-in, Azure check-in more accurate? I don't know, I'd have to ask. As far as like what that looks like from the product group side, if this is a bigger issue. But when it comes to Copilot and Copilot says, hey, there's a drift, like you might want to change your policy. That's when you tell it this is a wrong response. Or that's where, like Beth was saying, the human involved. So you are that human, like Copilot is not going to change the policy for you. That is what the human will do. And so it is the human to validate that this is true, it's a false positive, or it's a false negative. And that is, and then again, like, so it's going to know, like, maybe, like, it might still give you that response again, but it's going to suggest the drift, and, but you can then through the investigation, like, oh no, that's not truly a drift. And then that's where it's going to kind of pick up. So again, it's not changing the policies for you. It's going to just collect that information. And then like the one thing from a compliance standpoint that I thought of that I forgot to mention earlier. So like NIST 800-171, I think it's like 314.3 is like information sharing, like how are you getting intelligence? If you use Copilot for security, you have all that threat intelligence from all of those third-party sources at your fingertips. So that is something that checks that box right there. You know, you don't necessarily have to be part of all these forums. And I mean, those are all important, especially when it comes to what is going on. But from a technical standpoint, the technical implementation of how you are then actioning that threat intelligence and that information sharing is right there in Copilot for security, and it is helping your investigative process, making it a lot more efficient. So.
All right. Beth, I got one with your name on it. How would an organization need to update its existing written IT policies and procedure once AI is introduced to the environment?
Say that again.
How would an organization need to update its existing written IT policies and procedures once AI is introduced into the environment?
So that's where your regular, I actually, we talked about NIST, but I like to utilize the ISO framework when implementing standards. It has a nice management oversight portion of it. There's a lot of documentation control and what have you in any of the standards, but it gets you thinking in terms of managing your compliance program, regularly performing audits, internal audits, doing audits against the framework, doing audits against your own processes, doing audits against the rolling out AI, you should put a written policy or an update to the written policy. And oh, by the way, you should also be looking at your risk and issue log and updating your risk to see, is this the only thing that I need to do to mitigate? Yes, we can put a written policy in place and adjust for that. And we do. Right, Tim? But we also have to train folks. We have to get them to be aware. And sure, everybody knows they have the annual cybersecurity training. Click, 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 click. But there's other ways to also do that, and that's through phishing campaigns to reinforce that security awareness. Emails, not just when you get an incident, but ongoing on a regular, not just in October when cybersecurity month. Trying to really make it a fun game when you do so. Um, our our cybersecurity team, they're kind of evil. Oh no, well, Tim is pretty evil when he comes up with his phishing campaigns. I have to say, he is like the worst of the worst, but in a good way. But for example, we utilize Paylocity for HRIS system and its annual security training time. Cybersecurity team will send out an internal phishing campaign from Paylocity relative to that. And you're like, wait, hold on. Can we not do that at the same time we actually need our people to do something? But the reality is that those phishing campaigns, those phishing attempts can happen at any time. And then another time when you would want to do that. So regularly reviewing your policies on an annual frequency, regularly updating them when there's newer change services, but also after a cybersecurity incident. What lessons learned did you have? Doing the root cause analysis that Kyle was talking about when we're summarizing an incident that occurred. What happened? What do we need to do to prevent that from happening again? Is there a training deficiency? Is there a documentation deficiency? Do we need to put a technical policy in place that blocks the public chat GPT, for example? So using the lessons learned, when we first did this, we had somebody put information that they shouldn't have put into the chat GPT, and we put a corrective action report team, a tiger team, we call them, to do the root cause analysis, re-educate, re-update the policy, re-update the risk and issue log. So there's a multitude of things that you can do, and your compliance team can help guide you on a regular basis. Making this a regular way of life is critical for things like what Ryan asked.
I'd like to add one other thing too. When generative AI became kind of commonplace and a household name everywhere, a lot of organizations assumed that there was kind of a one-stop shop for addressing it, which was just to create an AI policy. And a laughable number actually went to AI to create the AI policy. Ask me how I know that. But I think there is some better guidance, is that it is not just a one-stop shop. It doesn't suffice to have just a single AI policy. I think to the heart of your question, as AI and generative AI are becoming more commonplace through Copilot, whether you're allowing your users to use ChatGPT and Claude and Meta and all these other things, is that you need to look at the breadth of your policies, and you need to integrate language and guidance around how AI can, should, or should not be leveraged across all of those things. I'm not saying not to create a single AI policy. That is fine, and there are applications for that. But it touches everything now, and you need to take that into account as you're looking and reviewing and updating policy.
Which means it shouldn't just be the cybersecurity or the
True.
compliance team looking at that policy. Your business stakeholders, the CEO, the CFO, those that have a primary stake and input should also be part of that. That's where you're not just checking a box, you're making it ingrained, and awareness ingrained in your organization.
And thinking about, to dovetail on that as well, thinking about if your users interact with clients, are you okay with them having a generative AI or an LLM generate a response to a client and send it to them? And it doesn't even have to do with technology, right? If you're a customer service representative, are you okay with them using LLMs to summarize things and send? Because as we've talked about earlier, as Carly pointed out, hallucinations are a real thing. And if they're not sanitizing that stuff, if you're not careful, you could have a user that is sending hallucination to a client. And that is a bad look. So outside of IT, Beth is absolutely right. Every facet of your organization needs to think about how your users could, would, or should be using those platforms.
And I agree with that. It's in every policy. It's how do your end users interact with it? How about your privileged users? Does this add to your data handling policy? You know, do you send it, like, can you send a summary that's and then they just put this was generated by AI. Like, we have some of those at Microsoft where people that is part of the like response so that they know that it's come from Copilot. I mean, I've used it. We did an AI summit for our government customers here a few months back, and my follow-up email to everybody with all the links and everything was, this was generated by Copilot. So just to kind of hit it home. But like one of our sessions there was about acceptable user policy. Like, and it's, I think people are also like, this is so big, it's going to be so difficult to like, how do we incorporate this? It's keep it simple. How do you want people to interact with it? What do you want them to be able to do with it? And like, what can't they do with it? And so, you have to bring in all the business stakeholders. Legal has to get involved because they also are thinking from their perspective, which that was fun to talk to a room full of lawyers about AI, and they're like, no. So, but they were more comfortable by the end of it because we talked about it, and it's really, again, when we talk about those boundaries, that also helps, and that making sure that people know that is how it operates. So, but as long as you're thinking about where does it go in our policies, and policies always get updated, because that is also your CYA for if users do something wrong. You signed this. It's getting incorporated into all different sorts of trainings and the cybersecurity required trainings and certifications. And so it's just getting it's that awareness. But people don't read it, not my problem. It's there. You don't read the fine print, not my problem. You signed it, so this is how you're supposed to operate on our devices. So, which is what gets people all the time because they don't realize that this is a company issued or they're on company time, company resources, and they look up the wrong things. But I digress. Anyway.
Well, and let's also just talk about cyber insurance. We have to have that in place, and there are things in there that those questionnaires many people don't know how to fill out, or sorry for you BD salespeople, fudge a little bit, but it can come back later on. There is a organization out there that has submitted one of the questionnaires and got subpoenaed by the Department of Justice about the validity of that questionnaire. You don't want to find yourself in that situation. You want to be honest about what you have in place. And you want, before you even get to that point, to be implementing these things. But from a cyber insurance perspective, you know, you don't want the company to drop you later on or not pay out because you said you did these things but didn't. So,
All right, Carly, I'm gonna pick on you primarily for a minute. Uh, um, one thing that you mentioned is the cost of Copilot for security earlier. What are some things that you can do to maximize Copilot's value or Copilot for security's value specifically?
Sure. So it's like I said, kind of during my one, it's all about the prompt. So if you want to, maximize the value, it's how are you using this? What do you want your analyst to use this for? One of those ways is, the permissioning. And so they can only use prompt books. So they're only using it for investigating incidents or doing threat actor reports. And so keeping them to that prompt book is also keeping them from just kind of going down their own like rabbit hole. And then it is curating, very specific responses that they can then be used. It's also don't give it to everyone at once. Start small, figure out what your internal processes are, figure out how you're using it, because you can then adjust those prompts as well and create your own prompt books, not just the ones that are out of the box. And then maximizing the value is plugins, like using everything that you can from an information grabbing perspective. And there are more plugins coming out all of the time. Not as many plugins are going to be available at first in GCC and GCC High, but those plugins are where you're also going to get that maximum value because you're getting the maximum amount of context for your prompts. So, and then again, as the LLMs are advancing and then your LLMs are getting updated, faster response times means lower cost.
And then, you'd mentioned a bunch of benefits of Copilot for security. One I found interesting is threat hunting. Can you kind of give an overview of how Copilot for security makes that easier, more efficient for everybody?
So because you're getting that threat intelligence from all of these other third party and, Microsoft, their threat teams. So that's giving you that information and being able to then take that and ask for it to create queries, whether it's within Sentinel or whatever your seam of choice is. There are prompts that come with some of these third-party plugins that help you maximize those third-party plugins, whether it's you're using Splunk, and so you've got Splunk connected, but it's writing those queries for you. So you don't have to think about what is this going to look like? Or if you do it wrong, like I said, I am not someone who knows anything about writing KQL or anything like that. You can literally be like, I want to write a KQL query for this, and you put in some of the specific information, it pops that query up for you and tells you where you can use it. And so it's making it easier so that you don't have to have somebody who is super well versed in that. Or if the next new thing comes out, or, AI, like it's Python and KQL are like the two things. So with that, so you don't, if you are really great at Python, but don't know KQL, which is a lot of what Microsoft is based off of, or you come from a Splunk shop, you've hired somebody who is a Splunker, and now they're going to be working in Sentinel, Copilot for Security is going to help them kind of ramp up faster because it's going to teach them along the way the difference with the tooling. And so that's kind of how that threat hunting and then that reverse code inquiries is this malicious, like it's all giving you those answers without you having to go out and try and figure it out. And if you don't know it, it makes it easier for even the smallest company to be able to have like a super SOC. You don't have to be a big Raytheon or a Boeing to have a great SOC because you've got Copilot to help you for that.
And a follow-up question on that, I might be getting carried away here, but can Copilot for Security replace a SOC?
No, not yet either. Like, especially not yet. Again, like I said before, right now, we don't currently have Microsoft written like APIs or logic apps for that automation. We have a lot of partners that have started to create those things, which is fantastic. And so that can help automate remediations. But Copilot, I don't think we'll ever be able to take away the human element because you have to make sure, again, because that security drift or that compliance drift, who is making that decision? It has to be somebody making that decision. It's just making it easier for you to find that information, getting all of the information, and it's making you more efficient, allowing you to respond faster. Especially as we have more technology, we are more global, we are more remote. The signal is exponential. And so how do you get through all of that? How do you prioritize? For example, like you can come in and say, what are my top 5 critical alerts? And then it'll pop your top 5, and those are the first things that analyst does that day. So it helps you figure out what to prioritize, but it's never going to take away what you know about your environment and about the human element of it. Because at the end of it, we're all still dealing with humans, even with those alerts.
Well, and if we take it back to the cars for a minute, with the advent of the computer systems in your car system, in your car, the alert has to come up for the mechanic to even know what's wrong. And you go to the mechanic and you're like, something's wrong. It's doing this. So I don't know what it is because a light didn't pop up and it didn't say in a computer code. And so the art of actually the true mechanics of a car is becoming lost a bit. But I think that it's kind of disadvantage. It's a disadvantage to the car. If it's not in the computer button, can't fix it. But as we all know, it's a real problem because your Tesla is brake checking somebody out of the blue. You know what I mean? So just something to be mindful of.
And,
Again, people.
and I think while I'm thankful that Carly didn't say yes, it's going to replace a SOC because I don't want to look for a job right now. I do think that it's going to fundamentally change the way that they are architected and structured. I've been doing managed SOC services and building SOCs for almost my entire career. And I'll tell you that it is, to this day, still a people problem. It is an alert fatigue. And we're still dealing with this 30 years later. I had an interesting conversation with one of the original engineers from Sentinel the other day, Eli Abramovich. I got a chance to speak with him. And he's like, 30 years later, we're still dealing with alert fatigue. And historically, the way to do that is you throw people at it. It is eyeballs. It's the ratio of eyeballs to alerts is really how we have solved this problem traditionally. Copilot for Security, I think, is going to take an average security analyst and is going to turn them into the Batman of security analysts, right? And I think that's fundamentally going to change the way a managed SOC looks. It won't be hundreds of people, it may be dozens. You know, it won't be, or even if it's a dozen people, it may be a couple or a few, because they will be more efficient. You know, these platforms with all the interconnected technologies allow them to do 10 times more with fewer human resources and people. That's great. That means security becomes a much more affordable thing. It's the meat bags that cost a lot of money in the equation, ultimately, right? And this is, as you scale with people, that problem gets dynamically worse over time. So that's the awesome thing. I mean, watching Carly's presentation this morning, I'm thinking about all of the ways in which I can take the team that I have today and force multiply it by 5 or 10 or 20. You know, really ambitious folks that just don't have the bandwidth to do all of the things at once. And this is unlocking that for them.
Another thing you touched on is some of the delays in implementation across GCC, GCC High with Copilot for security in particular. For some of the other Copilots, are there any feature limitations or, you know, things that still haven't been rolled out yet? And is there any sort of timeline for when those features would be available?
Well, so no Copilot is available in GCC and GCC High. So that's the big gap right now. But they are working through getting, FedRAMP approval is one of our biggest hurdles. So between that and ensuring compliance with everything that is needed, and then that it functions. And so we're never given a true date. I've heard, I think maybe Copilot for M365, which is what most people kind of want, is going to be first, maybe in the next 6 to 12 months. And I know Security Copilot, I think, well, wishing I haven't gotten an update on the FedRAMP package yet, because once that's submitted, then they'll start with like developing. But 12 to 18, unfortunately. But Copilot for GCC, like we're testing it like right now because it sits on Azure Commercial. And I don't know if we're going to end up having that slide, but like if you don't understand the difference of our clouds and what that looks like and why, like I can touch on that during the last session, which focuses primarily on compliance. But so GCC essentially sits on Azure Commercial. So it's going to come to GCC first, because GCC is grounded in Azure Commercial. And then once it gets into Azure Gov, that's when we'll see it in the GCC High and the DoD, because it is an Azure grounded service. So unfortunately, no strict dates, but we're working on it real hard.
I appreciate that. I have a question I thought of too as you were kind of going through these. So if the open AI platform, I hope I'm wording this right, isn't gathering or learning anything from your tenants specifically, what is educating the platform as a whole so it continues to evolve?
Well, so OpenAI is free and open to the public. So ChatGPT, so that's what's training OpenAI's model. And then as they update that LLM, we then get a copy of that new LLM, that GPT-4. You know, it started out as GPT-2, now we're at GPT-4. And so now our copilots are grounded in that GPT-4. And so any training, which again, it's not really training, is happening within your tenant because it's all grounded in your tenant's information. Now you can connect it to where it can pull in response information from the internet, but that again is a choice that you make. But you are then your responses are not leaving, and it's not training that main OpenAI model. Those boundaries of the Microsoft security boundaries, those trust boundaries, your tenant boundaries, that's what's kind of keeping. It's almost like it's software. Like Copilot is a software, essentially. And so now, so anytime the OpenAI model is updated, your Copilot gets a software update, OS update, however you want to look at it. Does that?
Perfect. Yeah, thank you. Kyle, this may be for you. How does licensing work for Copilot for security?
So it's not actually licensed on a per user basis. Copilot for Security is very similar to how your Azure resources are paid for. So you have an Azure VM, it's on for 730 hours a month. You're paying for those 730 hours for it to be on. Copilot for Security is built the same way. There are what's called SCU or security compute units, and you pay for each compute unit. I think it's like $4 per hour per month. Um, so the more prompts you are making inside of security or Copilot for Security, the more compute units you'll need to use. If you want it to respond faster, you need to get more SCUs. And so that's based off of consumption. I don't believe today, and Carly, um, uh, let me know if I'm wrong, but I don't believe today you can do what you can do with other Azure resources with reservations, but I think that may.
So I don't think today you can. And so I was going to also say, like, if you look at kind of the history of Sentinel and Sentinel pricing, um, at the beginning it was fairly expensive and the pricing, like the compute units pricing was one way. We now have this tiered pricing. There's also predictable pricing. I foresee that happening also with Copilot for Security and even just the other Copilots, since it is based again upon usage. I think M365 Copilot might be a combination of license and compute, but I think Copilot for Security is going to be full just compute. And so it's that consumption model, um, which again, if you want to, reduce that, you reduce the kind of access that your people use. And then also, like, I think they'll eventually get to like tiered, like how Sentinel is today. It's all just conjecture.
I was gonna ask them, if anybody in the group has questions, please be sure to ask. My handwriting's terrible.
I was gonna say, I can't read that. No, we're actually.
Ask what?
Chief Entertainment Officer, remember?
But no, that's actually exactly where I was heading, was to open the floor if you all had any questions for the panel.
Look at the mic.
No more?
We just crushed that. Nobody has a question?
So they've been asking whenever it comes up, and I love that.
I got one. I don't know if you guys can answer it, but with everybody using, the different tools, right? So Google has one, Microsoft has one, Meta has one. And as a company, starting out, you may hire people or may have people in your organization that are already using it before you put controls in place, because this is just the nature of the change. Is there a way that the old data that let's just say I was using on Google, can I move my old prompt data and all of my archive stuff over to Copilot so that I don't lose any of my old data? Or is that not possible?
So I don't know how Google stores like the prompt data and all of that. But yeah, but so like I'm pretty sure, and that's a really, like, it's stored in, I don't know where exactly it's stored, but it's typically like stored in your tenant. So depending on how that is stored, whether it's like a database or whatever, that information, you probably can migrate it to be just part of a database, and that it's then something that's reasoned over. I don't know if you know anything.
I don't think there's a straight migration from it, but I think you can do it iteratively. So export it into a database like Carly mentioned. There would definitely be some custom work involved into importing it into the Microsoft platform, but we've done a lot of Google to 365 migrations, and there are tools, there's processes in place that you can migrate that data over. So I think it would just be a matter of doing that in a couple different steps. I do think eventually, that's a really good question. I think eventually there may be some third-party providers out there. AvePoint may be one of them in the future that comes out with a method to migrate that data over.
And I think it also is, do you want to keep those prompts and that those responses that, like, if I create a PowerPoint from a prompt I typically will save it.
Yeah.
But you'll create retention policies for prompts and responses. And so, anything that you would want to keep would then just go, to.
Yeah, because I think it's more about, organizations are testing this right now.
Right.
So certain people might have access, maybe everybody has access. And when you decide to choose whichever version, flavor you want that works for your organization, it's those past prompt data that I've noticed that when you create your profiles, you create a really nice prompt and you have it working
Yeah.
for you, it's losing that ability to then take it into the next one is where I'm seeing, because it happens with everything, right? Even email and whatever we
Right.
went through years ago, where you lose some sort of data in the process. So I'm wondering if that's been accounted for.
That's a really good question. Because I would think because it's from one tool to the next, like you said, that quote integrity of like you've trained it in one way. Now you've got a new model. You can keep those prompts, bring those prompts over to train the next one, but it's depending on is it the prompts that you want to keep, or is it if it's that back end training, you're going from two different models. So I don't know if there's a path forward for a model migration, but interesting.
Yeah.
I want to take that for now because now I'm curious.
I think we have a break.
believe so.
Yeah.
I think for
Break
lunch. Yeah, lunch.
Break and lunch.
So I want to, if there's no other questions, I encourage you guys.
To network with each other. We have a bunch of clients that are existing clients for us here. We have some prospective clients as well as some partners. So, and supporters. So really encourage you guys to network with each other, and enjoy the break. And hopefully you're enjoying this so far.
Does he have lunch set up in the same place breakfast was on the other side?
Yeah.
Okay.
This hasn't started yet. I just walked there. There's nothing there. Like, it is a-
Pepper went downstairs to get the people.
yeah, they're coming up. They'll be setting up. There's just nobody there yet. So if you walk out there and you see a bunch of action, that's why they're setting up now.
Good time to use the restroom then. Talk amongst yourselves. All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah.
The only reason I didn't jump back on this is
With them. Yeah, you went to the wrong place.
I mean, I've been with them too, so it's like,
Hey, Ryan.
I know we're going to the other phones, and it's the same thing. I should have worked on it. I thought this was about to start laughing. Sock, there you go.
All kinds of songs.
No.
And,
Yeah, it's completely random. He posted on LinkedIn and I was like, wait a minute, I'm here too. So we were hanging out. It got me in trouble.
SharePoint, started using it.
It'll be ready in about 2 or 3 minutes. If you go out this door and go straight down, that's where it will be for lunch.
We've reduced it to about 50 now. Well, luckily they do. You don't even, I even asked, you get it in. We need to get out, right? It's not like they can walk. He's not in the right. I've only been here. Like there's no one like data there. I like that. Started on the things. You didn't Friday afternoon, you got. I used to ask too, and I